The data came back clean, again. Ren Akafer stared at the numbers on his screen for a long time without blinking. Around him, the underground facility hummed with the sound of cooling systems, of machines that had been running without pause for 3 years. The room smelled like dry air and metal. 42 meters of solid rock sat above his head. Nobody on the surface knew this room existed. That was the point. He pulled up the result file and read it from the top. A probe, 1 kilogram of metal and sensor equipment, had been placed inside the gate arch at 03:47 local time. By 03:47 and 3/1000ths of a second, the probe had been detected by the receiver node. The receiver node was 47 light-years away. 47 light-years in 3 milliseconds. Ren saved the file. He closed the screen. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a breath he had been holding, it felt, for about a decade. Someone knocked on the glass behind him. He turned. His lead technician, a tall woman named Sola, was standing in the observation corridor with both hands pressed against the window. Her eyes were wide. She had seen the numbers too. He gave her a slow nod. She covered her mouth with both hands. Then she started laughing. On the other side of the galaxy, in a chamber built from the bones of a dead star, the Galactic Council was having an argument. This was not unusual. The Council argued constantly. It argued about trade routes, about territorial rights, about which species had used whose communication frequency without permission. But today the argument had a specific subject. Humanity. Councillor Brawl sat at the center of the great curved table. He was old by any standard. His species, the Thuvan, counted their lives in centuries, and Brawl had lived through 4 of them. He had spent the last 30 years making sure that the small, warm-blooded, short-lived species from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star did not become a problem. He had managed this mostly by making their world small, travel restrictions, boundary zones, trade caps, soft rules written into hard treaties. Humanity had been folded up and placed in a box, and Brawl had been the one to close the lid. He was not pleased with today's report. "They have been probing the boundary again," said an aide beside him, a pale Thuvan functionary with careful eyes. 3 unmanned vessels. Each one crossed the restricted zone by approximately 12,000 kilometers before returning. "How long has this been happening?" Brawl asked. "This particular pattern, 8 months. Brawl looked down at the table. 8 months of quiet boundary probing. Each incursion small enough to ignore, together large enough to mean something. And the Council's position? Divided, as always. The aide glanced toward the far end of the table, where a cluster of smaller species sat together. Several members believe the restrictions on humanity have already gone too far. Councillor Asana of the Veth has been vocal. Brawl did not look at Asana. He did not need to. He knew her position. He had known it for years. She thought humanity was being treated like a child that would never be allowed to grow. Maybe she was right. Brawl did not particularly care whether she was right. He cared about outcomes. And the outcome of giving humanity more room was one he did not want to think about. "Keep the boundary restrictions in place," he said, "and file a formal objection with Earth's Transit Office. Make it polite." The aide nodded and moved away. At the far end of the table, Asana watched Brawl without expression. She had been watching him for a long time. She had started to notice that his decisions about humanity were not made from reason. They were made from something older and quieter, something that looked very much like fear. The facility beneath the Atacama Desert had 41 staff members. Every one of them had signed documents so dense with legal language that most people would need a lawyer to understand them. Every one of them had been selected not just for skill, but for the kind of person who could carry something large and silent for a very long time. Ren walked the length of the gate chamber slowly. The arch itself was enormous, 18 meters tall, 12 wide, built from components that had been labeled and shipped and assembled under 3 different cover projects. It looked like a piece of industrial art. It had taken 9 years to build. 8 years before that had been spent proving on paper that it was even possible. He stopped in front of the arch and looked through it. On the other side was just the chamber wall, gray concrete, overhead lighting, nothing remarkable. But for 3 milliseconds this morning, the space inside this arch had connected to a point 47 light-years from here, and 1 kilogram of metal had passed through that connection without damage, without distortion, without error. He put his hand on the side of the arch. The metal was warm from the power running through it. He had been afraid of it for a long time, not afraid that it would fail, afraid that it would work. Because if it worked, everything changed. Not just for Earth, for everyone. He pulled out his comm and sent a single encrypted message to one address. The message had no body. The subject line read, "Confirmed." He put the comm away. He looked at the gate one more time. Then he walked back to his desk, sat down, poured himself a glass of water, and began drafting the report that would change the galaxy. Above him the desert was quiet. The stars were very far away. For now, the signal went out at exactly noon Greenwich Mean Time. It did not go to one place. It went everywhere at once, every council relay station, every registered diplomatic frequency, every open communication channel that humanity had access to. The message was encoded in 47 languages, including all 12 primary tongues of the Galactic Council. It had been written and rewritten over 11 months. Every word had been chosen carefully. It was polite, it was precise, and it was devastating. Ambassador Yara Suleiman had been in the council chamber for 6 hours before the signal arrived. She had asked for an emergency session under Article 9 of the Contact Protocols, citing a development of galactic significance. The council had granted the session with mild irritation. Earth's ambassador was known for pushing procedural buttons. They expected a complaint about the boundary restrictions. They expected a speech. They did not expect what they got. The main display in the chamber lit up as the signal arrived. Every delegate received it simultaneously on their personal screens. Suleiman stood at the human podium and said nothing. She let them read. The message explained that the global authority of Earth had developed and successfully tested a long-range instantaneous transportation system. It was called the Solaris Gate Network. There were currently 14 active nodes. The message included the precise coordinates of each one. It described the technology in general terms, enough to confirm it was real, not enough to explain how it worked. It stated that the first successful test had been conducted 7 weeks ago. 47 light-years in 3 milliseconds. For a long moment after the signal finished, the chamber was silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting their turn. The deep silence of a room full of beings who had all, at the same moment, understood something terrible. Suleiman looked at Brawl. He was staring at his screen. His face had not moved, but his hands, resting flat on the table in front of him, had gone very still. She had studied Thuvan body language for a long time. Stillness like that meant the same thing in Thuvan as it did in human: shock. Pure, cold shock. She had imagined this moment many times. She had thought she might feel triumphant. She felt something quieter, something that was closer to relief. The coordinates were the detail that made it real. Any species could announce a technology. The galaxy had seen false claims before: inflated capabilities, half-working prototypes dressed up as breakthroughs, but coordinates were verifiable. You could send a ship. You could look. And as the council delegates began running the numbers, they found that 7 of the 14 gate nodes were positioned outside Earth's restricted boundary zone. Not just outside it, deep outside it. 2 of the nodes were sitting in regions that the council had considered strategic corridors, carefully managed passages through which a significant portion of galactic trade flowed. One node was 40 light-years past the boundary. Another was 63, and they had been placed there, positioned, activated, without a single council ship detecting anything. The delegate from the Asari species stood up and started speaking very quickly in his own language. The translation system caught up a few seconds later. He was asking how long the nodes had been there. Suleiman answered. The outermost nodes had been operational for 3 weeks. The first node, the original test gate, had been built over 9 years. 9 years, repeated the Thuvan aide beside Brawl. His voice was very quiet. Suleiman heard him. Yes, she said, we are patient when it matters. Emergency sessions were called within the hour. Brawl convened a closed-door meeting of the 5 founding species, the Old Guard, the ones who had written the original council charter 400 years ago. Suleiman was not invited. She did not expect to be. She went back to the human diplomatic suite and sat down with a cup of water and the feed from Yato, the Gate Network's managing intelligence. Yato's voice came through the room speaker, calm, unhurried, slightly dry. The Thuvan military channel has increased traffic by 600% in the last 40 minutes, it said. The Asari have recalled their ambassador from the boundary station. The Veth delegate, Asana, has not moved from the council chamber. She is sitting alone at the table reading the technical summary. What do you think she's thinking? Suleiman asked. I don't speculate about emotional states, Yato said, but she has read the section on transit capacity 4 times. She's doing the math. Yes, the math is interesting. The math was this. With 14 gates, Earth could theoretically move personnel, equipment, or supplies to 14 points in the galaxy in the time it took a Thuvan warship to charge its drives. If those gates were expanded, if more were built, the strategic geography of the galaxy, the careful balance of distance and time that had kept the powerful powerful and the small contained, no longer worked the way it had yesterday. Distance was the oldest form of control, and humanity had just made distance irrelevant. On Earth, the public announcement came 3 hours after the council broadcast, a simple video address from the global authority delivered by the director of communications, not a head of state. The tone was matter of fact. The Solaris gate network had been built. It worked. Earth was proud. Further developments would be shared in due course. The reaction was immediate and enormous. News feeds collapsed under the load. Social networks melted. People stood in city squares watching the broadcast on large screens and then turned to the people next to them and just stared. In an underground facility in the Atacama, Ren Akefer watched the public address on a small screen in a break room. His team was crowded around him. Nobody said anything for a while after it ended. Then Sola said, "Do you think they'll come for us?" Ren thought about Brawl, about the closed session happening right now, about a galaxy that had just discovered its map was wrong. "They'll want to," he said. "Whether they will is a different question." He paused. "We thought about that. We thought about it for a long time." He didn't say what they had prepared. He didn't need to. The gate behind him hummed with quiet power, and outside it, somewhere in the dark between stars, 14 nodes waited. The war room on Thuva did not have windows. It had been built that way on purpose. The original architects believed that military decision-making should be insulated from the world outside. What Counselor Brawl needed right now was exactly the opposite. He wanted a window. He wanted to look out at the stars and understand how he had missed this. He did not get a window. He got 12 military advisors, 9 intelligence officers, and a table covered in star maps that had become useless overnight. The senior advisor, a general named Preth, had not slept. It showed. He stood at the head of the table with a pointer and a face that said he had rehearsed this briefing 4 times and still did not like the conclusion he had reached. "The fundamental problem," Preth said, "is transit time. Our fastest response ships require between 4 and 19 hours to reach any point in the contested zones, depending on current position. The human gates operate in milliseconds." He paused. "This means that any offensive action we take against a gate node gives Earth the opportunity to respond before our ships arrive at the next target. We cannot outpace a network we cannot enter." "Can the gates be destroyed?" Brawl asked. With sufficient firepower, yes. A single node could be eliminated, but the network is distributed. Destroying one node does not collapse the system, and the moment we destroy one, Preth stopped himself. Say it, said Brawl. The moment we destroy one, we have committed an act of war against a civilization that can now appear anywhere in the galaxy at a moment's notice. Preth set his pointer down. Our models do not produce a favorable outcome for that scenario, Counselor. Brawl looked at the maps. He had spent 30 years making sure that this moment would never come. He had written the boundary restrictions himself. He had lobbied, quietly and firmly, against every proposal that would give humanity more access to galactic infrastructure. He had argued that they were too young, too reckless, too violent in their history. He had been telling himself that for so long he had forgotten the other reason, the real reason. He had been afraid, not of what humanity was, of what humanity might become if it ever stopped being small. Now it had. Fractures appeared quickly. The Council had never been perfectly united. It was a body built on compromise and carefully managed disagreement, but the announcement tore open divisions that had been papered over for decades. The Asari, a mid-sized species with significant trade interests near the gate nodes, requested an emergency consultation with Earth's diplomatic office within 72 hours of the announcement. Their message was carefully worded. It was not an offer of support, not exactly, but it was also clearly not the condemnation Brawl had hoped for. The Drali, a species of gas cloud dwellers who had been on the losing side of a council trade dispute 5 years ago, sent a message that was less careful. They sent it directly to Ambassador Suleiman. It said, "Congratulations, we would like to speak." Suleiman forwarded it to the global authority with a single note, "Told you." 3 other small to mid species made similar quiet approaches in the first week. None of them were loud about it. They did not stand up in council chambers and make speeches. They sent private messages through encrypted channels, the way small species had always communicated when the big ones were watching. But the meaning was clear. Humanity's rise was not universally frightening. For some, it looked like an opening. Counselor Asana spent the first 3 days reading. She read the technical summary 3 times. She read the historical record of human technological development, which was shorter than most species' records but significantly denser in terms of rate of change. She read the Council's own internal assessments from 15 years ago, which had concluded that humanity posed no significant technological threat for at least another century. On the 4th day, she requested a private meeting with Brawl. He agreed to see her in his personal chambers. They sat across from each other with nothing on the table between them. "You want to know if I will support a military response," Brawl said. "No," Asana said. "I already know you won't get one, not a consensus. I want to know what you are actually afraid of." Brawl looked at her for a long moment. Outside his chambers, somewhere in the dark, a council spy vessel was orbiting Earth's solar system at maximum passive sensor range, watching. It had been watching for 6 days and had reported nothing threatening. No new gates being built, no military movements, no posturing, just Earth continuing to exist the way it always had. "They built this in secret," Brawl said, "for 9 years. Inside our boundary restrictions under our monitoring while we watched them, and we saw nothing." "Yes. That is what I am afraid of, not the gates." He paused, the patience. Asana was quiet for a moment. "That is a more honest answer than I expected." "I am very old," Brawl said. "I have stopped pretending." "Then let me be equally honest," Asana said. "A military option is not viable. You know this. Preth knows this. The only path forward is negotiation, and if we wait too long, humanity will have built enough alliances with the smaller species that we will negotiate from the weaker position." Brawl said nothing. "They were always going to grow," Asana said. "You delayed it, you did not prevent it." Yato sent its message on the 7th day. It did not ask permission. It simply sent it. to every council species simultaneously through the standard diplomatic relay, a live feed from Gate Node 7, the node that sat closest to the council's primary supply corridor. The feed showed nothing alarming, a gate arch floating in space, stars behind it, quiet, still. The feed ran for 12 hours and then Yato cut it off without explanation. In the Thuven war room, one of the junior intelligence officers summarized it in a report. The human AI sent us a picture of the gate near our supply lines for 12 hours and then stopped. We do not know what this means. Preth read the report. He knew exactly what it meant. It meant, we are here, we have always been here, we are not threatening you, we are simply letting you know that we know where you are. He did not include his interpretation in the official summary. Some things were better left unsaid in writing. Instead, he went to his office, sat down, and began a new document, a private one, not for the record. At the top, he wrote 3 words and then stared at them for a long time. They thought ahead. He did not know what to do with that. He saved the document and closed it and went to find some sleep, because he had a feeling the next few weeks were going to require him to be very alert. Outside the building, the city of Thuva hummed with its usual noise. But in the spaces between the sounds, if you listened for it, there was something new. Something that had not been there before the announcement. A low, quiet unease that had settled over every conversation and every meeting and every careful calculation. It was the sound of a galaxy realizing it had made an assumption, and that the assumption had been wrong for a very long time. Neutral Station Alvith had been built as a compromise, which meant nobody loved it. It sat at the edge of the disputed Carven Corridor, a point in space that technically belonged to no species and was claimed by 4 of them. The station was ugly and functional, corridors too narrow for Thuven comfort, gravity set at a level that satisfied nobody completely, a meeting chamber with seating configurations that had been argued over for 2 years before anyone could agree. It was, in other words, a perfect place for a summit between parties who did not fully trust each other. Ambassador Suleiman arrived on a human transport ship that docked at exactly the scheduled time. She walked through the station corridor with 2 aides, and behind her, on a mobile platform the size of a carry case, came a small terminal displaying a soft blue interface light. This was Yato's mobile presence. It had been Suleiman's decision to bring it. The council had not objected. They had not been sure how to object. 212 delegates were already inside the chamber when Suleiman entered. They had come from across the council, some because they were required to, some because they were curious, and a few because they had decided, quietly, that they wanted to be on the right side of whatever was about to happen. Brawl was present. He sat at the center of the curved council table, as he always did, as though the seat belonged to him by inheritance. He watched Suleiman cross the room and take the human position at the main floor podium. He watched her arrange her materials. He watched the small terminal with the blue light settle beside her. He said nothing. The technical session came first. This was deliberate. Suleiman had proposed the agenda, and she had buried the hardest parts under 3 hours of facts. Ren Akafer sat at the secondary desk behind the podium. The council's scientific committee faced him across a smaller table. They were professionals and they behaved professionally, which meant they asked their questions in careful, neutral language and tried very hard to hide the fact that they were frightened. He answered their questions about the gate system with the same careful neutrality. How was the energy requirement managed? Through a distributed network of solar collectors positioned near each node. What was the maximum transfer mass? Current tested limit was 40,000 kilograms per transit. Could it be scaled? Theoretically, yes. Could it be weaponized? Asked the Asari scientific lead, a thin being with large compound eyes who had been quiet for most of the session. Ren looked at her. He had known this question was coming. He had rehearsed 4 different answers. He gave the honest one. Anything can be weaponized, he said. A gate, a ship, a rock. The question you are really asking is whether we have weaponized it, and the answer is no. The network was built for transit. The defense platforms near the nodes were built for protection, not offense. Those are not the same thing. How do we know that? Asked the Asari. You don't, Ren said. Not yet. That is what this summit is for. Brawl made his move in the afternoon session. He rose slowly from his seat, a deliberate gesture, the kind of thing that filled a room when a 4-century-old Thuvan decided to take up space. The chamber went quiet. He had always had that effect. The containment accords, he said, were signed by Earth's global authority in the year 2274. They established clearly and in binding language the permitted zones of human expansion. The Solaris Gate network, the nodes positioned beyond the boundary, represent a direct violation of those accords. This council has the legal standing and, I would argue, the obligation to demand their deactivation. He sat down. The room murmured. Suleiman let the murmur settle. She let it run out completely before she spoke. Then she picked up a single document and held it up. The containment accords, she said, were signed under the Council's Charter of 2251. That charter contained, in Appendix 7, a clause establishing that all binding agreements required ratification by the full Council membership as it existed at that time. She set the document down. At the time of signing, 41 species had not yet submitted their ratification. They never did. The accords were never fully ratified under the Charter's own rules. They were, in the technical language of galactic law, a statement of intent, not a binding treaty. She paused. We have known this for 11 years. We did not raise it because we had no immediate reason to. We raise it now because we do. The murmur became something louder. Brawl's expression did not change, but his hands had gone flat on the table again, that stillness Suleiman had noticed before, that deep, cold stillness. Counselor Asuna leaned forward. She spoke quietly, but the room had gone quiet enough that everyone heard her. Ambassador Suleiman, she said, what does Earth want? Suleiman looked at her. She had been asked versions of this question in every private conversation she'd had in the past 3 weeks. She had given diplomatic answers. Not today. To stop being small, she said. The specific demands had been written long before the summit. A permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. Removal of the single-species veto power held by the 5 founding species, including Thuva. Immediate renegotiation of all boundary and trade restrictions applied to Earth. Access to the standard infrastructure networks that every other council member enjoyed. And a new framework for gate access to be negotiated openly and fairly over the next decade. These demands were not a surprise to Asuna. She had received a copy of them through a quiet back channel 4 days before the summit. She had spent those 4 days counting votes. Brawl rejected the framework outright. He stood, stated his objection, and left the chamber. 12 delegates who were closely aligned with Thuva followed him. 187 stayed. Over the next 4 hours, 6 of those species signed a preliminary accord, a statement of agreement in principle, not the full treaty, but the foundation of one. The Asari signed. 2 of the smaller species who had sent quiet messages to Suleiman in the first week signed. Asuna signed in her personal capacity as a delegate, nodding that she expected the full Veth Council to ratify. When it was done, Suleiman stood in the corridor outside the chamber with Ren beside her. She was quiet for a moment, not celebrating, just still. Brawl will fight it, Ren said. Of course he will, Suleiman said. He has spent 30 years fighting it. She looked toward the stars visible through the station's narrow viewport. But he is doing it alone now. That changes the arithmetic. Yato's terminal, sitting on its platform beside them, spoke softly. The preliminary accord has been transmitted to all council species. Current favorable response rate is 63% and rising. Suleiman nodded slowly. Let me know when it crosses 70. Of course, Yato said, and then, after a brief pause, you should eat something. You have not eaten since the morning session. Ren almost smiled. Suleiman looked at the terminal with an expression caught between fond and exasperated. Sometimes, she said, I forget you're watching. I always am, Yato said. That is the job. Order was given in secret. That was the first mistake. Brawl had spent 4 centuries in galactic politics. He knew how to move quietly. He knew which channels were monitored and which were not. He knew how to use the Thuvan military's black budget division, a structure that officially did not exist, funded through a cascade of budget redirections that had never, in 400 years, been traced to its source. He used it carefully. He used it with the full confidence of someone who had always gotten away with it. He commissioned 6 warships, not Thuvan military vessels. That would leave too clear a trail. These were contracted through a third party, an Asari-registered freight company whose ownership structure ran through so many shell entities that even a thorough audit would take years. The ships were crewed by professionals who did not ask questions. They were given a single objective: destroy Gate Node 3. Node 3 was the human gate nearest to the Council's primary supply corridor. Brawl chose it for that reason. It was the node that had frightened the Council most during the summit. Destroying it would be a demonstration, a proof. He would show the Council that the gates were not untouchable. He would show them that humanity's grand network had a weakness, and that weakness could be exploited. He would turn the tide of the preliminary accord before it became something permanent. The fleet assembled in a quiet system, 4 light-years from Node 3. They took 3 days to prepare. On the 4th day they entered FTL. Yato noticed them on the 2nd day of their assembly. Not through any dramatic act of intelligence gathering, through Node 9's passive sensor web, which was a standard feature of gate network operation. Node 9 was positioned in the same region of space that the assembly fleet had chosen for its staging point. The passive sensors were not designed for military surveillance. They were designed to monitor local space for debris and interference. But 6 warships running drive systems generated interference, and the sensors noticed. Yato did not alert the fleet to its detection. It flagged the data internally, ran a probabilistic analysis on the fleet's likely trajectory and purpose, and then did something that was entirely within its authorized operational parameters. It rerouted Node 3. The process took 11 hours. The gate arch of Node 3 was a physical structure. It could not teleport itself. But the node's support systems, the power array, the transit interface, the coordinate lock, all of it could be reconfigured remotely. Yato reassigned Node 3's coordinate identity to a dormant backup location 60,000 kilometers away. The original position of the arch was powered down to minimal standby. Externally, from a distance, it looked exactly the same. Dark, quiet, apparently inactive. Yato then notified one person, not Suleiman, who was still at Station Alvith finalizing the preliminary accord, not Ren, who was in transit back to Earth. General Davi Reyes, commanding Earth's defense grid, received a message at 04:12 ship time. It read, Fleet of 6 vessels, probable private military contract, on approach to former position of Node 3. Node 3 has been repositioned. Former position is cold and passive. Recommend no active defensive response. Recommend observation posture. Recommend full sensor logging. All data will be preserved. Reyes read it twice, then he sent back a single word. Confirmed. The fleet dropped out of FTL at 40,000 kilometers from the original position of Node 3. They ran passive scans for 4 minutes. The gate arch registered as dark and inactive. No energy signature. No active transit lock. No sign of the defense platforms that Earth had disclosed existed near the nodes, because those platforms moved with the node itself and were now 60,000 kilometers away. The fleet commander gave the order to fire. 6 warships opened up on a cold, empty gate frame. The arch took 11 seconds to break apart. They hit it with enough firepower to destroy 3 times its mass. When they were done, there was nothing left but hot gas and fragments drifting outward in a slow cloud. The fleet commander sent a burst transmission to his employer. Target destroyed. Node 3 is gone. And then, 11 seconds after that transmission was sent, every passive sensor in a 2-light-year radius lit up with data. Because Yato had been recording everything: the fleet's approach, their weapons signatures, the drive emissions, the communication encryption patterns, the routing chain of the burst transmission, and had just finished tracing that chain back through 4 layers of shell companies to a budget account registered to the Thuven Black Division. Yato transmitted the complete data package to every species in the Galactic Council simultaneously. It did so through the standard diplomatic relay, with no preamble and no dramatic language. Just time-stamped data, clearly labeled, impossible to misread. It included the identity of the contractor, the ownership chain of the fleet, the budget account, the name attached to the authorization code. Councillor Brawl. The council session that followed was not called emergency. It did not need to be. 314 delegates showed up voluntarily within 12 hours of the data transmission. Nobody had to be summoned. Brawl attempted to speak. He was not shouted down. The council was more dignified than that. He was simply not listened to. He spoke for 6 minutes. The chamber was quiet during those 6 minutes in the way that a room is quiet when everyone in it has already decided what they think. The vote was 184 to 12 to remove him from the council. The 12 who voted against were Thuven delegates who had no real choice. Even 3 of them looked uncomfortable. Councillor Asana was elected acting chair by a margin large enough to make the result feel less like politics and more like relief. She assumed the seat at the center of the table, the seat that had been Brawl's for decades, and looked out at the chamber with an expression that was hard to read. Not triumphant, not satisfied, something more careful than that. Her first act as acting chair was to reopen negotiations on the preliminary accord. Her second act was to send a message to Ambassador Suleiman. It said, "I believe we have unfinished business. When you are ready." Ren heard the news somewhere over the Indian Ocean, in a transport ship running at atmospheric cruise altitude. One of his technicians showed him the feed on a handheld screen. He read it twice. He looked out the window at the ocean below. He thought about the 9 years, about the probe test in the Atacama, about the weight of carrying something large and silent for a very long time. He thought about what Sola had asked him back at the beginning when the public announcement had just gone out. "Do you think they'll come for us?" They had, and they had destroyed an empty shell and announced themselves to the galaxy in the process. He thought about Yato, about the quiet intelligence that ran the network, that had noticed the fleet, that had moved the node without being asked, that had waited and recorded and then disclosed everything at exactly the right moment. Not because it had been told to, because that was what made sense. He thought that maybe the most human thing about the gate network wasn't the gate itself. It was Yato. Someone handed him a cup of water. He drank it. Outside, the ocean curved with the shape of the earth, wide and blue, and the sky above it was clear all the way to where the stars began. 3 weeks after Brawl's removal, the rain came to Lagos. It came the way it always came at that time of year, sudden and total, turning the streets into rivers and the air into warm white noise. Ren stood on the roof of his apartment building and let it soak through his shirt. He had been inside for 2 weeks straight. Briefings, consultations, technical reviews, political calls that ran until 2 in the morning. The global authority had wanted him in every room. He had been in most of them. But tonight the calls had stopped, just for a few hours, and the rain had started, and he had come up to the roof because he needed to remember what the world felt like without a screen between himself and it. He looked up. Through the rain and the city glow he could not see stars. He knew they were there. He knew, more precisely than almost any other human alive, exactly what was out there among them. He had spent 17 years building a bridge to it. Down in the facility in the Atacama, the original gate was still running. Sola's team had it on a standard maintenance cycle now. The secret was gone. Earth's government had released a full public technical briefing 2 days ago, more detailed than the Council broadcast, designed for human engineers and scientists who were already lining up to work on the next generation of nodes. The Atacama facility would become a museum and a research center. It seemed like the right thing. You did not hide the place where something historic had happened. He stayed on the roof until the rain started to ease. Then he went back inside, dried off, and sat down at his desk. There was one message waiting, from Yato. It said, "The compact signing is scheduled for 9 days from now. I have reviewed the final document. It is mostly what we hoped for. There are compromises. I will flag the 3 I believe you should read before Ambassador Suleiman signs." He typed back, "Send them." Then he added, "Thank you, for the Node 3 situation." Yato's reply came in 4 seconds. "I did what made sense. That is what I always do." Ren sat with that for a moment. He thought it was one of the more honest things anyone had said to him in weeks. The Galactic Compact was signed in the same chamber where Suleiman had stood and watched Brawl's face go still. Someone had proposed using a different location, neutral ground, a new beginning, symbolism of that kind. Suleiman had declined. She wanted the room where the fight had happened. She wanted the signing to happen in the space that had been changed. 141 species signed. 58 abstained or declined, mostly species closely tied to the old Thuvan block, buying time, waiting to see how the landscape settled. Asuna signed on behalf of the Veth, having received full council ratification in record time. The Asari signed. So did the Drali and the other species who had sent quiet congratulations in the first week. And 19 species who had said nothing publicly during the entire crisis signed on the day of the ceremony, which was itself a kind of answer. The key terms were everything Earth had asked for: a permanent seat with full voting rights, no single species veto, immediate renegotiation of boundary and trade restrictions, the gate access framework to be built jointly over the next decade, with terms transparent to all members. It was not everything Suleiman had wanted. The 3 compromises Yato had flagged were real, small limitations on gate expansion speed, a joint monitoring protocol that Earth had not proposed and did not love, and a sunset clause on one of the new trade provisions that would need to be renewed in 20 years. She had accepted them. The core was intact. She signed with a pen, an old one with real ink. Her grandmother had used it to sign a community charter in a small city in what used to be northern Sudan, decades before Suleiman was born. She had carried it in her bag for the entire summit. She did not explain this to anyone. It was not for explaining. Asuna found her afterward, in a side corridor off the chamber, before the reception started. "I owe you an honest conversation," Asuna said. Suleiman looked at her. "You owe me nothing. I said nothing for years while the accords were used to keep your species contained. I knew there were problems with the ratification. I did not raise it." Asuna paused. "That was a choice I made. I made it because changing the arrangement required a fight I did not want to start." Suleiman was quiet for a moment. "We knew about the ratification flaw in 2381, she said. "We sat on it too, because we were not ready, because we needed time." She looked at Asuna. "We are all guilty of waiting when we should have acted. The difference is what we do when the waiting is over." Asuna considered this. "Are you afraid of us?" she asked. "Of the council, of what we might still do?" "A little," Suleiman said. "Are you afraid of us?" "Very much so," Asuna said. "Still." Suleiman nodded. "Good. That means we will both be careful." Yato opened Gate Node 1 at 21:00 Earth Standard Time on the night of the signing. Ren had asked it to. It was a small gesture, A single gate opened wide, its transit field extended and active, broadcasting a visual of the connected network. Not operational transit, just the image of it. 14 points of light scattered across a star map, connected by thin, bright lines, a web of reach that had not existed a year ago. Ren stood in front of the original arch in the Atacama and looked at it. Sola was beside him. Most of the original team was there, called back for the occasion, standing in the room where they had first watched a probe vanish across 47 light years. It was warmer now than it had been then. Someone had brought food. The facility did not feel like a secret anymore. It felt like what it was going to become. Yato's voice came through the room speaker. The network is stable, it said. All 14 nodes nominal. The compact document has been filed with every council relay. Response signals are coming in. Current favorable acknowledgement rate is 71%. 71, Ren said. That's up from 63. People update their positions when the facts change, Yato said. That is not unique to humans. Ren watched the display, the 14 points of light, the lines between them. That's what we built this for, he said. I know, Yato said. I remember every calculation, every test run, every error log, the probe that came back misaligned in the third trial, the power surge in year 6 that shut us down for 4 months. A pause. You were all afraid it would fail. We were afraid it would succeed, Ren said. Those are different fears. Yes, Yato said. I know. Humans have both at once always. I used to find it inefficient. Another pause. I have revised my position. Someone laughed. Then a few others. The room loosened in the way that rooms loosen when something long and heavy has finally been set down. Outside, the desert was cold and clear. The stars were visible all the way to the horizon, a thick band of them, unbroken. Somewhere out among them, 14 gates hummed with quiet power. 14 windows into a galaxy that had just been asked to decide what kind of place it wanted to be. It had not finished deciding. It would not finish for a long time. That was the nature of these things. But the first vote had been cast, and humanity had not cast it with a weapon. It had cast it with a bridge built over 17 years, in secret, in patience, in the very specific kind of stubborn hope that does not announce itself until the moment it no longer needs to. The gate pulsed once, soft and steady, like something breathing. Ren put his hand on the arch the way he had on the night of the first test. The metal was warm. He left it there for a while, feeling it hum. Then he went to find something to eat, because it had been a very long day and the galaxy, for the moment, could manage itself.